So, welcome. I guess it's Thursday, and I'm on my last piece of paper for this whole spiral down book. So, let's see if we can make it a beautiful one. Our whole chapter, or our whole section that we've been talking about here, is speciation. And that leaves us with a question that I don't know you've ever thought about, but maybe you kind of have an idea. The question is, what is a species? What is a species? And I'm left with, I have this book. It's like the field guide to mammals in North America. So this is just all the mammals that fill up, North America, including, all the way up to the Arctic Circle. And in this book, it's amazing what it does is it has pictures of all of the different animals that might live here and their names. And then if you go and you look them up, you can see where they're found and just maybe a little information about them. So you can see their habitats and different species that are like them and different things. And as I flip through this book and I look at all of these different animals, and of course, they have these for plants too, and for fungi, but you have this massive amount of diversity. And like here's our wolverine and the sea otters and the fishers. There's all these little weasels and wolves and foxes and cats of all manner. So we look at these. There's ringtails in the Sutter Buttes. Did you know that? But we look at all of these animals and we can recognize them as members of different species. We know that a badger's a badger and a raccoon's a raccoon. And, your different ground squirrels and chipmunks and squirrels and going back to our genetics connection, we know that they all have different homologous chromosomes. And when you think back on homologous chromosomes, when sexual reproduction takes place, you're going to get a set of chromosomes, one from each parent, and those chromosomes have to match up. Let's say this is chromosome number 1. And so you're going to get one of these from mom and one of these from dad. And in the case of species, you've got mom bear and dad bear. Let's say they're polar bears. And so they're purebreds because, they're polar bears. And they're going to be throwing their chromosomes together, and they have obviously more than one chromosome set. They've got the whole genotype that they have. And those chromosomes, when they get put in together, the sperm and the egg, they have to match up. And that matching up is, in a lot of ways, what one thinks of as a species. If your homologous pairs match up, that could equal, a species. But, the world is an interesting place, and things happen. And so when it comes to naming a species or deciding a species, it gets complicated. And the world doesn't always work by the strict definitions that we might like to think it does. And to speak to that, I wanted to point out a case. And the case is, I'm going to just flip to this picture here of a grizzly bear. Where did he go? The grizzly bear got a scientific name. Oh, the bears are right around in here. Yeah, there they go. So here's our grizzly bear. And just for fun, I think it'd be fun to try and draw a little grizzly bear right here. I'm going to use my drawing my drawing that I have in front of me, and you can use my drawing, and let's see if we can have any success at all. Remember, drawing is not just for fun. Drawing actually has been proven to help you with some of your other skills. Even if you're not good at it, the process of drawing pictures helps your brain cognitively to do better at math and science and other things. So it's a good idea to just work a little drawing into your daily activities if possible, because that's going to help you in the long run. And really, that's our goal in life, is to get you set up in a way that you're successful. Okay, so I kind of just did a outline. I'm going to throw an eyeball in there. And yeah, it's starting to look a little bearish, maybe a little mountain goatish. But you know what? No judgment. So a grizzly bear is, his range is in North America and Canada, I believe. And they have a bump on their back. I think that's pretty visible. I've been watching some documentaries with some grizzlies. Grizzlies are aggressive, from what I understand. Like if you run into one on the trail, you're going to be kind of in bad shape. They can run really fast. You can't really outrun a bear, from what I understand. So you shouldn't even try. And then over here, I want to sketch next to this grizzly bear a polar bear. And by this time, you probably already know where this story is going. Maybe you don't. Maybe I still can surprise you. Polar bears are Arctic. They are huge. They swim. They can swim very far distances. They live on ice. They eat seals a lot. And they're, in general, huge, terrifying bears. Polar bears, yeah, you wouldn't want to get near one, because it would probably kill you and eat you without thinking too much about it. And, you know, they're beautiful, though. I mean, let's think about that. Just because they're that kind of bear. Okay, I have now a rough sketch of my polar bear and my grizzly bear. Yeah, I know. It's beautiful. All right, some things you're going to notice that's different about these two bears is the snout is significantly longer, and it's not going to have like a big brow ridge, is what we're going to call that. We don't have the same bump on the back. It's a little bit more flattened, a little bit more rumpish. And I just made that word up. And our brown bear, as you well know, are brown. I don't even have brown, do I? Ugh, that's so wonderful. Oh no, there's brown. Brown bears are brown, and polar bears are, of course, white. Though I'm told their skin is not white, it's a black color. And that combination helps them maintain heat, because, you know, where they live, it's darn cold. And swimming around in Arctic water is also darn cold. So we've got two things going on there. But we all recognize these as different species. And these different species are, you know, separate from one another. Well, some point in the not too distant past, I think in the last 20 years maybe, I'm not sure of the dates, don't quote me on any of that, there was an instance where a polar bear and a grizzly bear got together and actually had babies. So what happened here is that, let's say dad was the grizzly bear and mom was the polar bear. Normally, these two bears out in the wild would never come into contact with each other. They would never have offspring together. But in the case of the bears that did have this happen, they were in a zoo or something. They were not in a natural habitat. And when they came together, they do have viable offspring that can go on and have offspring of their own. So originally, there used to be, or still is, this definition of a species that's called a morphological species concept. And morphology, that word means body or body shape. And in the morphological species concept is based on how a species looks or what its body looks like. And that's inside and out. And it can be used to identify once living organisms. And by this definition, the morphological species concept, we can look at the polar bear, we can look at the grizzly bear, and we can safely say, okay, those are two different species of organisms, and they have their own little branch of the family tree because their bodies are different. They look different inside and out. If we had bones of them, we could tell morphologically that they're different from one another. So there is another, and morphological species concept is something that we have to use with fossils, because with a fossil, there's no way to tell what that species was doing in its life because it's dead and it's just a fossil, and there's no way to see what was going on. Scientists developed what's called the biological species concept. And the biological species concept is quite a bit different than the morphological species concept, but you can only do it with species that you can observe directly alive in their habitat. So this is a population of organisms that can interbreed. In other words, they share a gene pool, and we remember talked about those at the beginning of the chapter, and they cannot breed with other populations. So they must be living. You must be able to observe them. And they have to be found in nature naturally. So you've got a population that's breeding. So one population breeding with another population. Let me zoom this. Oh, I can't. In nature, grizzlies and polar bears do not come together necessarily in nature, or at least they didn't used to until just recently. Polar bears and grizzly bears are what we call geographically isolated. They're also socially isolated. I would imagine most times when a polar bear and a grizzly bear come into contact with each other, they probably just fight and potentially, hurt each other, not decide to have babies together. So the biological species concept works great for looking at populations as being isolated, looking at species as naturally occurring. In the case of the grizzly bear and the polar bear that came together, they didn't do that naturally, at least not originally. From what I understand now is because the climate change, the polar bears are actually venturing down into North America a bit more than they ever had before. And because let me just throw this map up as, this is for squirrels, but you can see up here is the Arctic Circle. It's not that, I mean, it's far away, but in general, the grizzly bears are moving up because it's warmer at these normal latitudes, and the polar bears are kind of moving down. And from what I've heard in reports is that there are naturally occurring grizzly bear, polar bear hybrids that are existing at that boundary. It's interesting that this is happening in my lifetime, because before, I mean, even just, I don't know how many years ago, we would say these things never happen in nature. But as the environment changes, things begin to happen that never would have before. And when we get into AP biology later, what we're going to learn is that just like this here and this here, when you have populations of grizzlies here, populations of polar bears here, that region where they meet is called a hybrid zone. The hybrid zone acts as a barrier, like a geographic barrier between the two species, and that can lead to speciation, which is interesting, but that's not something we're necessarily going to talk about this year. So, yeah, I have a short video that I've attached that talks about the polar bear grizzly phenomena. I want you to watch that and go ahead and just snap a picture of your two bears for me and put it in the comments, and that will be your homework for today. Put it in the comments, though. Don't make a special thing for it. All right, you guys have a great night.